Hi, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Not far from here, I live in Plimpton Park, and there's a main connecting road just down the road called Marion Road. And just down Marion Road in that direction, where I'm pointing to there, there's a nondescript little block of shops down on the left-hand side of Marion Road going away from here. And the shop's wrapped around the corner, it's on a corner there. And there was a photographer used to have his studio in there and his business located in there. He was a local photographer, an Adelaide photographer, and it's looking a bit funny, isn't it? Anyway, he he um, he was a local, well-known photographer. I knew of him. I knew he was a fairly popular photographer and had done a lot of photography. He was getting on in years at the time, and I was just starting out trying to get started in wedding photography. And I was pretty naive. I approached a few people around Adelaide to try and get some help from them to help me get established. And of course, when you approach people, they're not always helpful. Some were. This particular gentleman wasn't, because they think you're going to take work away from them. And I actually did end up taking work away from some established professional photographers in Adelaide at the time, or later on down the track when I got a bit more experience. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you all this is that this photographer he died a few years back now in the early 2000s, but I came across this book recently and I thought, well, I've got to get hold of that book. And it's called Confessions of an Adelaide Flasher. There's a play on words with the flash a bit there because he was a photographer. And it's written by the guy who owned that shop, which is no longer, might even still be there, or that little studio. And I rang him up and I said, I'm just starting out in wedding photography and I'm looking for someone reliable to process my photography. Would you be able to do that for me? Because I thought I'd seen ads about him, and I thought, well, he's got all the gear in that little shop there and he's just down the road. And anyway, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he wasn't all that polite towards me. He didn't think he was going to help me at all. Anyway, Confessions of an Adelaide Flasher, that's the name of his autobiography, which I found, which is a beautiful book. And this is by Vic Grimmett. Now, some of you who have been around Adelaide for a long time will remember his name, and his famous father was Clarry Grimmett, who was a famous Test cricketer for Australia. And this is a wonderful book. It's a soft cover book, but it's well put together. I'll just read a little bit. And Vic Grimmett, he was a good photographer. He was also, I found out in this, he was in the Second World War, he was a Lancaster bomber pilot and flew missions over Germany. I think he got a DFC, which is quite interesting because my friend Greg, who you've seen on this channel before, his dad was in the Dam Busters squadron and flew Lancasters as well. And Greg's dad, Ross Stanford, was a famous cricketer as well as a Lancaster pilot. Anyway, that's just by the by. So, Confessions of an Adelaide Flasher by Vic Grimmett. I'll just read the I'll just read the introduction, and I'll try and show you some. There's lots of famous Adelaide people and overseas people in here. In fact, if you open up the front, here's a picture of Sir Donald Bradman and Don Dunstan. Don Dunstan was a flamboyant Premier of South Australia, and Donald Bradman was one of our adopted sons from New South Wales originally, who, of course, was probably the most famous, most well-known cricketer in the world. Anyway, let's see if I can find an introduction here. I did see one before. Well, I'll read from here. This is chapter 1, Early Flashbacks. What makes a good photographer? Are photographers born or made? I have often been asked these questions, but I have to say there is no black and white answer. I've had a love of photography all of my life. Thanks to my late father, Clarry Grimmett, besides being a famous cricketer, he was also a keen still and cine photographer who taught me the rules and skills from an early age. However, apart from that, I am mostly self-taught. I believe you have to possess an artistic flair, especially if you want to be a professional. It's important to have a good eye as well as a steady hand and be willing to keep up with technology. You have to be prepared to learn Excuse me. You have to be prepared to learn by your mistakes. No matter how long you have been in the profession, you can always learn something new. Some business sense doesn't go astray either. Apart from the war years, I've spent all my life in South Australia, and so have seen many changes in this state. I was 7 months old when my father was invited to play cricket for South Australia. When he accepted, he moved the family to Adelaide from Caulfield, Victoria, where I was born in 1923. That was the year radio station 2SB began the country's first regular broadcasting. Vegemite made its debut. Work started on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and Essendon defeated Fitzroy in the VFL Grand Final. Our first home was a rented house in St John's Street, Adelaide, just off Halifax Street. After a couple of years, my father purchased a new home on Glyn, now Glenburn Road, in suburban Firle. For a young boy, it was an idyllic setting because it was still undeveloped. Our house was surrounded by acres of vacant land containing many fruit trees, including peach, pomegranate, quince, apricots, lots of almond trees, and rows of grapevines. Like many boys of my age, much of my leisure time was like many boys of my age. Much of my leisure time was spent bird watching, hunting for birds' eggs, making cubbies, climbing trees, and catching tadpoles. My specialty was breeding silkworms. I was fortunate enough to have a large mulberry tree opposite our home, so I had an abundant supply of their favourite leaf food. That's a little bit of an introduction to it. It's just a gem of a book if you can get hold of a copy of this. A lot of the books, and I'm going to put underneath a link. You can see a lot of his work. He donated it to the State Library of South Australia, so you can actually look up a lot of his work and his photos. He did many weddings, and I was reading somewhere before where he said he got into weddings. The Beatles, when the Beatles came to Adelaide, he covered the Beatles tour, and I'll show you some pictures of that in a minute. Social pages, theatre, Rudolf Nureyev, some beautiful colour photos in here. Anyway, suffice to say, it's a wonderful book, and it's really interesting. I can't find where it was here. I should have done a bit more research and found it. But the very first time he was asked to photograph a wedding, it was by two brothers who were getting married on the same weekend, I think, with their prospective brides, and they were well-known Adelaide business people, and he'd never photographed a wedding, and they knew about his photography, and he'd scooped one in the early days. He scooped for a newspaper a shot about some police pursuing some robbers of a property not far from his home. But anyway, these guys knew about his photography, and they asked him to do their wedding, and he'd never photographed a wedding. He got away with it. It's a bit like what happened to me. I was asked to photograph 2 weddings in a row and 2 weekends in a row, and I never photographed a wedding for relatives, and I got away with it too. Anyway, there's so much in this book that you could read and love. Just let me have a look and see here. Some of the stuff about the Beatles. There's some colour shots in here. He used some pretty primitive cameras by our standards back in the day. He got permission from the different people where these had been originally published to show in his book, to publish in his book. Some more there at the Adelaide Airport. The parade for the Beatles, and in the foyer of one of the hotels. Not a lot of captions on some of these shots. I actually went to that Beatles concert when they were here at the Adelaide Centennial Hall, and they had played 2 numbers before the screaming died down enough from all the females that you could actually hear what they were singing. I think the first song they sang was "I Saw Her Standing There." I'm not sure. And they had Sounds Incorporated were backing them up. So here you go. Here's some more of the Beatles. Ernie Sigley, in that he was a well-known Adelaide TV personality, up in this shot up here, discussing John Lennon's book that he'd just written, I think, called In His Own Right. And he did model photography, lots of celebrities. There's John Farnham back in the heyday. And then Rudolf Nureyev came to town. Got shots of him. Marlene Dietrich. There you go. So I'm trying to get that right there. The one over on the left-hand side there, that picture over there, is Chubby Checker at Adelaide Airport, welcomed by Graham Parker, manager of Columbia Pictures. Checker came to promote the film Twist Around the Clock. There you go, Chubby Checker. Who remembers Chubby Checker? I certainly do. I was 16 when we went to a friend's birthday party. We were all learning to dance the twist. Some other celebrities, Adelaide celebrities here. Adelaide's singing nun, Sister Janet Mead. And bottom left, we had Hazel Phillips. And bottom right, Googie Withers on the set of Beckman Place, Adelaide Theatre Royal. And top left, a very young Bert Newton outside the West Weir restaurant when he visited Adelaide in 1969. There you go. Sister Janet Mead over there, sitting on the bench, had a big hit in the hit parade. She was a Catholic nun with the Lord's Prayer. She sang the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Anyway, that was very popular. That's a terrible rendition of how she sang it. And then royal families, royal visits, prime ministers, the Christmas pageant there. We have a famous Christmas pageant in Adelaide every Christmas time, and there's some early shots of the early floats going down the pageant there. Goodness me, there's Bobo the Clown and Bob Francis. Bev Harrell was a popular Adelaide singer back in the 70s. I remember going to see her on Saturday nights. There you are, some of the popular Adelaide personalities of the day and famous people from all over the place. There's Anne McMahon, who was a famous table tennis player, and she became Anne Middleton, and she won gold at the Commonwealth Games in table tennis. Here's some more show business stuff. So, John Travolta and Phil Skinner and Barry Eggleton in The Perils of a Drunkard's Daughter at the Old King's Music Hall, and a scene from Electra at the Theatre Royal, and up there is John Travolta makes friends with a koala at the Cleland Wildlife Reserve. So he photographed them all, but all the time he was doing weddings, and it's just a wonderful book. Louis Armstrong arriving at Adelaide Airport with his wife. So if you can find a copy of one of these, The Queen Mother's Visit to Adelaide, get hold of one. I recommend it. It's some wonderful reading, and he talks a lot about some of his weddings and how he did them. I'd love to read you all of that about the wedding, his experiences as a wedding photographer. Fortunately, I was young enough when I started to know lots of people contemplating marriage. So as the word was passing around that I was available for weddings, I found myself in demand. That's what happened to me. Gradually, I managed to compile a sample wedding album of photographs I had taken to advertise my services. By this stage, I was the proud owner of an enlarger, had all the necessary processing equipment, but lacked a proper darkroom. Necessity being the mother of invention, I blacked out the laundry in my home and resolved my processing around any washing that had to be done. Anyway, my dad used to develop photos in our bathroom, I think, black out the windows, had his own home processing outfit. But all I can say, Vic Grimmett, Confessions of an Adelaide Flasher. And it's a wonderful little book. This is in beautiful, almost mint condition. And I'm enjoying having a read of it. I haven't read it all yet. I'll just read the epilogue at the end of the book because it's worth probably reading, I think, so you can listen to um, this photographer as he was coming to the end of his career. Sitting in St. Lawrence's Church, North Adelaide, one Friday evening while waiting for the wedding service to finish, I said to myself, what am I doing here? Having photographed nearly 2,000 weddings, I felt it was time to give up this part of my career. So I decided there and then that I wouldn't take any more bookings. As my studio would no longer be necessary, I decided to terminate my lease and build a place at home where I could continue my career until I was happy to say goodbye forever. The place I built certainly paid for itself, but after 3 years I said, that's it. Reflecting on my career, would I be a photographer again? Well, if it was still the 50s, the answer would be yes. Today, definitely no. Photography today is aim, frame, and press the button. What a thrill it was to manually focus. Get a reading with an exposure meter. Set the aperture and shutter speed. Process, develop, and print, and see your results in the darkroom. If something was not right, you made sure you did not make the same mistake again. However, I would never have swapped my life as a photographer. To meet so many famous people, to be so close to so many important events, to make so many friends, and to receive the thanks of so many people could not be exchanged for anything. It was a marvellous 40 years. I can identify with a lot of those sentiments that he shares there because I was photographing weddings for probably 40 years. So there you go. Confessions of an Adelaide Flasher by Vic Grimmett, the late Vic Grimmett. And a wonderful book and a wonderful story. And he was a great photographer. And as I said, I'll put this link underneath where I found on the State Library. You can see a lot of his photographs that he donated to the library. So thanks for watching. Like if you like, subscribe if you wish, and I'll see you next time. See you later.